being bought by some clients of the university, be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone. We're human beings. And that brings me to the second mode of civil disobedience. There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart, that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
What do Patricia Churchland, Daniel Dennett, Robert Sapolsky, and the children in ICE detention facilities have in common? What is that beautiful, mysterious anomaly waiting to be explored to answer questions such as, what is wrong with confusing correlation and causation in studies about race and I'm sorry, I have difficulty saying those two terms in the same sentence without wanting to throw up. If you haven't already guessed, it's the human brain. Join me as I explore neuroplasticity through the neurophilosophy of Patricia Churchland and Daniel Dennett, and as I take a dive into the neurobiological studies of Robert Sapolsky in order to answer the questions, why should we be concerned about the treatment of developing children? Why should we be concerned about the treatment of human beings in general? The first thing we need to do is set the stage with neuroplasticity. Patricia Churchland, in her book Brainwise, Studies Neurophilosophy, frames the issue as such on page 323. Neurodevelopment and neurobiology have essentially laid waste to the very simple nature or nurture dichotomy. Biology turns out to be vastly more complicated than the simple dichotomy implies. If biological evolution exploits environmental information in building a creature, why not also for a creature's adaptation for environmental change? So what do studies in neurobiology reveal? Well, also on 323, Patricia remarks, there exist, certainly, causally relevant differences between prenatal development and postnatal learning, and between early development and later development, as well as between skill learning, priming, and conditioning. Genes versus epigenetic conditions is not a filter for any of those differences. Since I assume most of you aren't professional neurobiologists, let me clarify some terms. Prenatal is before you were born, or while you're in your mother's womb, and postnatal is after you're born. Epigenetics is the study of how gene expression can be modified, such as certain conditions turning certain genes on or off. On page 327, she concludes this exploration of nature versus nurture with, in sum, postnatal learning and prenatal development share mechanisms. Prenatal development relies on epigenetic conditions for gene regulation, and birth allows for a much expanded range of extragenetic conditions to figure in nervous system self-organization. We are neither blank slates nor bundles of instincts. Also, for a fun bit of information, if you've ever heard the term hardwired, consider this where she states on 327, typically this usage is too problematic since virtually all of a brain's functions are modifiable in one way or another, by expectation, conditioning, drugs, and assorted adjustments of internal or external conditions. This includes perception, motor control, thermoregulation, the vestibulo-ocular reflex, and various set points for anxiety, appetite, and aspects of sleep cycles. So, since the nature versus nurture dichotomy seems to be cleared up, what does this have to do with neuroplasticity? Patricia helps us bridge the gap on page 328 by asserting, we can begin by addressing the neural basis for postnatal plasticity, and more narrowly for postnatal plasticity that is uncontroversially experience-dependent. Hence, we shall consider what is more commonly called learning, remembering, forgetting, and adapting. Essentially, postnatal learning is impossible without some experience-dependent brain plasticity. How uncontroversial is this fact? Well, Daniel Dennett, a philosopher who's used the term hardwired more than I can count, stated in his book Consciousness Explained on 193 that plasticity is what makes learning possible. How do we do this? Probably by a process of generation and selection patterns of neural activity in the cerebral cortex, the huge convoluted mantle that has swiftly burgeoned in the human skull and now completely covers the old animal brain underneath.
Hi, Amanda here. Brief brain facts. May I take over the brain sections for you?
Sure.
Neuroplasticity is the idea that our brain is constantly adjusting to our environments. You see, researchers once believed that once the brain is fully developed at around the age of 25, the brain was incapable of changing. It wasn't until the 1980s that the idea that the brain could adapt based on life events after the age of 25 was discovered. The idea of neuroplasticity helps account for learning throughout the lifespan. Under neuroplasticity, existing neurons may develop new connections with other existing neurons. Importantly, neuroplasticity is not neurogenesis. That is, it's not the development of new brain cells. I do want to note that developing brains, such as the brains of children and young adults, was always assumed to be plastic for ages. This is thanks to the discovery of a process known as synaptic pruning. Babies are born with more connections between neurons than they'll ever need. As they get older, those connections get severed due to non-use. This process highlights the whole if you don't use it, you lose it principle, and it is a natural part of human development.
Okay, thanks I guess. Now back to some footage that I literally filmed a few weeks ago. Epistemologically, our knowledge and our understanding of this world around us is learned and developed postnatally, and there is no period of life more critical in this development than early childhood. Patricia Churchland gives us some examples of how self-representation and theory of mind develops in children on pages 100 through 114. I'm going to interrupt myself real quick here just to apologize for the sudden change of environment. I had to move a lot of my things in from the living room because I have a new roommate, and I needed the new roommate or else I would have been evicted from my apartment. So now this is going to be my new setup for now. And just in case you guys were wondering, no, I didn't spend rent money on this desk and this TV. These were actually completely free. Let's go back to the topic, I guess. Patricia discusses a study done by developmental psychologist Andrew Meltzoff in which he observed newborns as soon as 42 minutes after birth, imitating facial expressions that he would make. It was found that mirror neurons were responsible for this behavior, but Patricia made sure to comment, although the function of these mirror neurons in self-representation has not yet been established, their unique response pattern does suggest that they might well play a role in imitation, me/not me distinctions, and social cognition.
Hey again, let me take this one. The idea of mirror neurons was designed to answer a basic question. How do we mimic other people's movements? Essentially, these neurons are better conceptualized as visiomotor, visual plus motor, or movement, neurons. They are thought to fire when an action is either performed or passively observed, meaning they'll activate in my brain as I perform an action, but they'll also activate in your brain as you watch me perform said action. These neurons, with the help of microscopes, were first discovered in the macaque monkey and localized to the premotor cortex and the inferior parietal cortex. Unfortunately, no direct evidence of the existence of these neurons have been found in humans. Instead, researchers have relied on indirect evidence to support the existence of these mirror or visiomotor neurons. Due to ethical considerations, scientists have not been able to probe the brains of humans. So we've opted to utilize considerably safer tools, such as brain imaging techniques, in order to understand how the human brain operates. Regarding mirror neurons, what researchers have discovered using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI, is what is best described as a network, that is, multiple areas of the brain working together that may give rise to a particular phenomenon, such as imitation and mimicry. In this case, this network is larger, that is, it involves more areas of the brain in humans than was seen in monkeys, where again that direct evidence was found. The human mirror neuron network involves the inferior and superior parietal lobes, an area of the brain best associated with the integration of multiple sensory information. Another area of the brain that is part of this network is the dorsal premotor cortex of the frontal lobes. This area of the brain isn't well understood understood, but it has been associated with a variety of functions, such as planning movement and understanding abstract rules. Importantly, what researchers best know about mirror neurons in humans is that, again, it is best understood as a network of regions in the brain that help give rise to imitation and mimicry.
Thanks again? Well, let's get back to me from the past to top this off with some more Patricia. Knowing how early development occurs and how the brain comes to know and understand the world around it, we can understand how impressionable children at that age can be, and how experiences at that period in their life can affect the rest of their life. On page 235, Patricia leaves us with some parting wisdom concerning the function of responsibility in this post-neuroscientific world, saying, "A child must learn about the physical world by interacting with it, and bearing the consequences of his actions, or by watching others engage with the world, or by hearing about how others engage with the world. Similarly, learning about the social world involves direct or indirect cognitive affective learning about the nature of the social consequences of a choice. This must, of course, be consistent with reasonably protecting the developing child, and also consistent with compassion, kindness, and understanding." The significance of this segment in the context of the issue with the ICE detention facilities should be self-evident. They are highly impressionable and are likely to imitate the behavior of others around them. The stressful conditions of the environment is another important factor that will contribute to how the brain develops.
As mentioned, the brain is capable of change. That's especially true with developing brains. Now, this change can be either good or bad based on the situation, as is the case when exposed to stressful conditions. When stressed, the brain gets exposed to the chemical hormone cortisol, which can be useful in small doses. Exposure to cortisol is beneficial when a temporarily stressful situation needs to be managed, like when a student is stressed before taking an exam. It can help produce the focused attention that one is needed to overcome the temporarily stressful moment. Well, what happens when you've been taken away from the only parent you've ever known and placed in a prison-like facility for an indefinite period of time? High stress over an extended period of time can result in long-term health consequences. As an example, while some recreational drugs are not capable of affecting developing fetuses, that is certainly not the case with cortisol. Extended exposure to cortisol has been shown to influence the neural circuitry of developing fetuses. In other words, a constantly stressed out mother is really bad for the developing baby. Further, constant exposure to cortisol on developing brains may damage areas of the brain responsible for regulating emotions and developing memories. And due to neuroplasticity, this may also be the case for the fully developed adult brain, as cortisol not only has been linked to mental health issues, but also physical health issues such as hypertension and heart disease. Behaviorally, repeated exposure to stress has been shown to lead to aggressive behaviors or passiveness, even helplessness. Thus, it's entirely accurate to say that our neurons, our brain cells that communicate with each other to promote a change or response from the body, do develop to reflect their environments. As such, we must consider the burdens our society inflicts on others and ourselves, especially if we're truly concerned about the health and happiness of our fellow human beings. Alrighty, I'll let you have it from here. Thanks for letting me interrupt you. Take a look at my channel, which will be linked in the description box below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel here. I will see you next time. Bye.
Well, interrupt you did, but you did save me a lot of work. Well, now that we have all that out of the way, let's analyze the work done by the neuroendocrinologist and professor of biology and neurology, Robert Sapolsky. Robert Sapolsky is famous for his work studying the connection between hierarchy, stress, and the physical and psychological health issues in baboons. What he found was that low rank led to high stress. High stress led to an excess of glucocorticoids, say that 10 times fast, in the bloodstreams of low-ranking baboons. The excess of glucocorticoids led to physical and psychological health detriments. For the purpose of clarification, cortisol, the hormone mentioned by Amanda, is a glucocorticoid. The results of the study correlated with the results of a study done by Professor Sir Michael Marmot concerning humans, and also a study done by Dr. Carol Shively concerning macaques. This information and more can be found in the documentary Stress, A Portrait of a Killer. I'll leave a link down below. Robert Sapolsky had also participated in many similar studies that found a connection between the glucocorticoids secreted in response to stress and neurocellular degeneration in the hippocampus. There are several corresponding studies by Sapolsky and others, and I'll leave the link to those down below. Now, with the dry referential section of the video out of the way, let's put this all together. What does it all mean? Since apparently pictures of children in ICE detention facilities don't exist, here's a picture of impoverished children in India as a replacement. To explore what this all means, I should state the reasons compelling me to write this in the first place. One field of study in philosophy that has always intrigued me is philosophy of mind, and by the nature of that field, I always end up knee-deep in whatever's current in the field of neuroscience. When the terrible news concerning ICE detention facilities caught my attention, I realized that there was an opportunity to use the information from those fields to show the empirical outcome of stressful situations and stressful environments on developing children, especially considering how impressionable they are during those stages of development. The brain at that young age is highly receptive to environmental conditions, and knowing the effects of excessive amounts of glucocorticoids on the brain, these children are not only guaranteed to be prone to mental illness, but it is extremely likely that they will suffer cognitive impairments in the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex. Although children are the most vulnerable, this is true for human beings of all ages because neuroplasticity doesn't ever subside at any age. Though it does slow down, and stress, regardless of age, will always be detrimental to cognitive function. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned the race and IQ studies. Aside from all the dubious propositions about what IQ means, the studies ignore all the relevant conditions that may influence the results. Proper experiments take all conditions and variables into consideration to the extent of the researcher's abilities, and Charles Murray conveniently leaves out all the environmental factors. I've read the twin studies that apparently rule out environmental conditions as significant contributing factors, and those studies were poorly executed. In other words, they didn't properly test for significant environmental changes. The results directly contradict most, if not all, the research done within the neuroscientific field. The reason why all of this is relevant is that in the race and IQ debate, they leave out the effects that excessive stress will have on minority communities that are disenfranchised. Having to experience poverty due to redlining, racism, discrimination, and high rates of crime will definitely impact stress levels. And those that manage to bypass the physical cognitive detriment during development will at the very least find it distracting when trying to take tests or trying to study. Those conditions alone should be enough to explain why there seems to be correlation, not causation, between race and IQ. But just for the sake of putting the icing on the cake, I want to mention the compounding factor of having these types of experiences for several generations. From what we know about epigenetics, environmental factors can alter genetic sequences and those can be passed down to the next generation. This has been shown in situations where populations experience a famine, and this alters the metabolism of the subsequent generations. Imagine what the effects would be in a population consistently subjected to excessive stress. Well, what's the lesson to be learned? Well, don't put children in detainment facilities or labor camps. Don't put immigrants in detainment facilities or labor camps. Don't put human beings in labor camps. Don't separate children from their parents. Don't make false claims about certain races being inferior. It's a mistake confusing causation with correlation, as in bad science, and it could lead to the mistreatment of minorities, potentially exacerbating the issues that are truly responsible, like systemic racism. Push for an improved standard of living for everyone. It will decrease stress and improve human development. Improved human development will lead to a better society. Concluding remarks, be good to each other. That is all. My daughter's a gold mine, combing the hair of the wide waves, fountain of sapphires, under the bridges of Utah. Instilled in us ethics, not by God but by our choice. I can't even imagine when surrounded by comfort Cotton floors are of no use. We see in our forecasts what we lack in our pockets. Compassed by standards, and we give ourselves all the credit. I can't put my finger on